The name suggests there are two tubes involved in the manufacture of this fly. The first one I'm using is a very short section of large H&H tubing. This is probably about 3/16 of an inch, something like that. And I've got it on an HMH tube tying accessory here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to push this all the way back and secure the tool so that that little section of tubing isn't going to spin when I try to tie on it. Another thing I highly recommend when you're tying this fly is to take a file or a piece of sandpaper and abrade the outer surface of this piece of large tubing. What that's going to do is that when you secure the thread and bunny to this and glue it to it, it's going to make it so that it's not going to slide out of the thread, which is something that actually can happen quite a bit if you don't take that step when tying this fly. And so I've got my piece of tube here. I'm going to go ahead and just get a few wraps of thread on. Something like that. And this is going to end up being a lot of the fly here, this piece of bunny. It's about, maybe 4 inches long, something like that. What you're going to do at this point is leaving just a little bit on the back, maybe about less than 1/2 inch of leather. You're going to try to split the fur on the top. And so I've exposed the leather here, right where I'm going to tie it in. And, you know, it's hard to do this without getting a few fibers stuck in there. But I really don't think that matters a whole heck of a lot. I just try to minimize it. And that's probably pretty ample. The most awkward part about doing this bit is then tying it off. So I'm going to whip finish it now. And I can take this out of my vise. And this part is basically done with the exception of adding some super glue, which is important because I mentioned that that's one of the weak points, or can be a weak point of this fly, is that piece, that back tube sliding out from under the thread. So I'm going to go ahead and get some super glue in here. To hold that in place as well as I can. Now we're going to let that dry here for a moment. And we'll move on to the rest of the fly here, which I'm going to do on my Pro Tube needle. Now this section of tubing is going to be small H&H tubing. I'm going to go ahead and cut just a short section. We're going to need about 5/8 of an inch, something like that. Put her on here. And now I'm going to go ahead and I'll start about here with some thread. Now here I'm going to go ahead and first step is securing the bunny. I'm going to pull a little bit of the fluff off the front of the bunny leather so that I've got a nice spot to tie it in. Lay that on here. And again, this is one of the places where the fly can fall apart, so you know, it doesn't hurt to use a number of wraps there and then strengthen it again with a little bit of glue. Alright, moving on to my next step here. I'm going to use some dyed UV black polar chenille. I'm going to tie that in right on that same point where I tied in the bunny. Trim my excess, bring my thread forward a bit, and here I'm going to kind of try to put a number of wraps in a fairly tight space. I'll probably end up with 5 or 6 wraps here. And you can see this material is kind of kinky, so each wrap you're going to want to kind of comb it back with your fingers. And this is going to add a little bit of body to the fly, a little bit of flash, and it's going to help stand out my marabou feather that I'm going to stick in front of it. There we go, he's got a nice beard. And next up, the theme of this fly is going to end up being black and red. So you see I've got a red marabou feather here prepared. I'm going to pull the fibers back away from the tip a little bit. And go ahead and tie them in like so. I'm going to push them back and get another wrap in there to really lock it in. And go ahead and trim the point of the feather. Now I'm ready to wrap. I'm going to kind of gently comb the feather with my fingers, trying to fold it so I get all the fibers headed in the right direction. And I'll continue to just sort of fold it as I wrap it. If you don't get a good fold on your feather, you end up trapping a number of fibers as you wrap it. And we've got our marabou secured. Go ahead and tie that guy off. And trim. Alright, now I'm ready for my next step, which is going to be to add some flash to this fly. I love Flash-A-Boo. We're going to use that again here. And again, this is I'm thinking winter conditions with this fly, and I like this color combination for winter steelhead swinging, so I'm going to add a good deal of flash to it. I'm going to put three strands of Flash-A-Boo on either side. I got them on there. I'm going to go ahead and fold them back over themselves. So I'm really going to end up with 6 pieces of Flash-A-Boo, more or less, back across each side of the fly, which is going to add a good deal of flash to this guy. Now, I've only got one more step here, which is to go ahead and add my fore hackle. And for this, I'm using dyed black ringneck pheasant rump, which is a feather I like quite a bit. You could use a number of different things here. You could use guinea, schlappen, saddle. I like pheasant rump because it has sort of a natural iridescence to it. Tie that in by the tip. And once again, I'm going to fold before I wrap. And this pheasant does fold nicely. The fibers have a nice curvature. Give the fly a nice graceful look. Alright, and we're basically done here. I'm going to go ahead and whip finish. And there we are. I'll go ahead and take the fly. Well, I guess I can trim my flash first. Again, I'm going to try to keep that just a little bit shorter than the tail. What that's going to do, it's if I leave it full length, I might run the risk of the flash fouling around the fly as I'm fishing it, so I'll cut it about that long. And here, I can take this off the needle. And you can see I've got a little excess tubing there in the front. So I'm going to go ahead and trim that a bit with my utility scissors, something like that. Cool. And once again, I'm going to go ahead and heat this with the blue part of the flame. Get it good and hot. And then stop and try to get a nice flared head on the front there. And once again, that flared head both is going to hold, the thread in place there, but it's also going to be an important part of actually rigging this fly, because I'm going to rig this, putting the hook on the back end of a big loop that's going to come through both the sections of tubing that I've tied on there, and having the front of the front tube heated and compressed like that is going to make the hole in the front smaller than the hole in the back, so that when I bring the knot of my loop through that front tube, it's going to hold that loop in place and keep the hook exactly where we want it relative to the body of the fly, which is going to be back here behind the back tube at the very back of the fly.